Sad news from the sports world, including our CBS Sports family. Greg Gumbel, broadcasting legend, died Friday after a battle with cancer. He was 78 years old and just a giant of the industry. He initially came to CBS in 1988. He worked other places over the years, among them NBC, MSG, WFAN, ESPN.
Yep.
He's a former Sports Center host, which is not something that I think I recalled until I read it this weekend. Do you remember that?
I knew of it because Gumbel, really, I do think he had a one-of-a-kind career, and we saw it in the remembrances from multiple networks. Like, it's rare when a famous broadcaster passes that you have so many different broadcasting entities chipping in to pay respects to him, and that's because he was a seminal figure everywhere he went, and his presence along with Chris Berman, Bob Lee, Tom Mees, like they were central figures in building out ESPN in its fledgling days. And so I was aware of it, but got reminded all the more so in the past.
I guess I'm sure I knew it at one point. It wasn't, if you'd have asked me a week ago, I would not have remembered that, but it was an interesting thing to read. So Greg worked a number of different places, but he is most closely connected to CBS Sports. And in his career, he really did do it all, like called Super Bowls, hosted Super Bowl coverage, anchored coverage of Major League Baseball, college football, NASCAR, the Olympics, called NBA games, MLB games, even College World Series games. Like, you name it, Greg Gumbel probably did it and likely did it better than everybody else. Just a huge figure in the industry who, for our purposes, is perhaps best known as the host of CBS Sports college basketball coverage from the late 1990s until he stepped away from his professional duties for health reasons that we now know were a cancer diagnosis. For decades, Greg Gumbel told us if our favorite college basketball teams made the NCAA tournament or not. Like, who are the 1 seeds? Who's the best 5-12 matchup?
Right now, as you say this, yes.
Like, who finished just on the wrong side of the bubble? For decades, Greg Gumbel was the man who broke that news to the world. So the industry lost an important person this weekend. Our CBS Sports family lost an incredible human. Norlander, before you and I were lucky enough to work for the same company as Greg Gumbel, we just watched him on TV and admired him from a distance like everybody else. In some ways, we did grow up with him through our televisions. That's a fair way to put it, isn't it?
It is. I want to say a couple more things, but I want to give our viewing audience, and if you're listening, obviously this is going to be on the audio feed as well. Our team at CBS Sports put together a really nice tribute to Greg. And Josh, if we could, let's cue that up. This is a good 2.5 minutes looking back at the distinct, legendary career of the one and only Greg Gumbel.
Hello, everyone. I'm Greg Gumbel. Welcome to CBS Sports.
A television staple for half a century, Greg Gumbel saw it all.
Not only the biggest story of these Winter Olympic Games, but the biggest story of any Winter Olympic Games.
After starting his career in his hometown of Chicago, he went on to work for ESPN and MSG before joining CBS Sports in the late 1980s.
Kenny, it's a brand new day. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to New Orleans. Welcome to Omaha, Nebraska, and to the championship game of the College World Series. I'm Greg Gumbel.
It was at CBS that Greg will become one of the most versatile announcers in television. Renowned for his smooth delivery and composed demeanor, he thrived as the host of the NFL Today.
Hello, everyone. I'm Greg Gumbel. Along with Terry Bradshaw, we welcome you to the NFL Today.
As a play-by-play announcer,
Lowe is going to take his first free throw left-handed in honor of his friend and Gathering.
And as an Olympic anchor.
Nancy and Tanya, Tanya and Nancy.
After a short stint at NBC, he was back at CBS.
All of us here at CBS are pleased to welcome the National Football League back to CBS Sports.
Greg joined forces with Phil Simms to form the lead NFL announce team and made history as the first black play-by-play announcer to broadcast a major championship sporting event.
We are glad you are with us on CBS, and Super Bowl 35 is underway.
3 years later, he was on the call again.
Hi, everyone. I'm Greg Gumbel, along with Phil Simms. From 41 yards. Looks good. The New England Patriots claimed their second Super Bowl championship in 3 years.
After returning to host the NFL Today,
I want to welcome you back to the seat that you once came from. Back in the 90s, you're back in the seat old school.
I appreciate that.
Greg would return to the booth to call NFL action for another 17 seasons.
Flacco stepping up and throwing deep down the far sideline.
For more than 25 years, he was your host for March Madness, guiding you from Selection Sunday all the way to the Final Four.
It's time for that moment that we've all been waiting for as we celebrate the culmination of another great tournament with those who have earned their one shining moment.
It's only fitting that Greg had countless shining moments of his own, a trailblazing announcer with a legendary career that will never be forgotten.
For all of us here at CBS, I'm Greg Gumbel. Thanks so very much for joining us, everyone. Good night.
A really tremendous tribute there. I hate that had to be made under these circumstances, but the people who made it really handled it beautifully. And just sad news on the weekend. Greg, I think people remember maybe, he missed the selection show last March.
Yeah.
At the time, it was described as a family illness. Adam Zucker filled in. There was always a hope that Greg would return to the CBS Broadcast Center this season. Sadly, that did not happen. Somebody who knew him better than most of us is Seth Davis. We all work with Greg, but some more than others. Like I mentioned on HQ yesterday, there's a level to CBS Sports, and Greg Gumbel's at the tip top of that. He hosts Olympics, and we do a podcast. So we were colleagues with him, but not nearly the way some others were. Specifically, Seth Davis. He had a really sweet piece on his Hoops HQ site. I know you read that and really liked it as well.
I did. I'm going to read a couple graphs from Seth because he did a wonderful job remembering. By the way, the great James Brown, one legendary broadcaster, remembering another in that CBS remembrance there. That's the perfect touch. And yes, to all the people associated with making that video and remembrance about Gumbel on our team, wonderful, wonderful stuff. Here is what Seth wrote. Give me a good, minute and a half here, because he gives more of, I think, Gumbel's personality and who he was than people realized. So I'm reading directly from Seth's column right here. Greg Gumbel did not care for parades. I'm not sure why. Maybe it was something about the artifice of it all, the way people got together and cheered for all those silly things that were strolling by. Mostly, I think it was an affectation, a touchstone of humor for Greg to come off as curmudgeonly when everyone knew that he was actually the sweetest man alive. Greg also didn't like golf. He tried it a couple of times, hated it, gave it up, and then spent the rest of his life mocking the game and those who enjoyed it. This was a constant source of amusement because Clark Kellogg and I love golf almost as much as we love college basketball. When we would wax poetic on the CBS set about our respective games and the courses we played, Greg would sit back in his chair and roll his eyes. He would make us chuckle with the overly grave tones he used when reading a promo for CBS's golf coverage. If a highlight came on of showing a player about to strike a putt, Greg would crack, bet it goes in. Greg had a strong aversion to eggs and a Costanza-like ability to act hilariously annoyed at small things. But he loved a lot of things too, like stand-up comedy and slapstick movies and Howard Stern. Once in a while, during a highlight, I would drop in a Baba Booey reference to see if I could throw him off on live TV. Greg and I were both fluent in trading places. There was literally no situation where some line from a movie couldn't be dropped in and send us both guffawing. He had a very high batting average when it came to forwarding jokes over email. He loved classic rock, especially the Rolling Stones. He'd text me photos from all kinds of shows he was attending during the year. And the only thing Greg loved more than laughing was making other people laugh. When you were around him, that's what you usually did. Most of all, Greg loved his family, especially his granddaughter, Riley. There was no conversation that he didn't immediately steer her way. I can scroll through years of text messages with him and watch her more from infant to young lady. Here's Riley learning to walk, Riley snuggling a puppy, Riley playing the violin, Riley singing, Riley smiling with her grandpa. She was the center of his universe. Today is an immeasurably sad day, not just for me, of course, but for the countless people who knew and worked with Greg all these years. When people die, you always hear tributes about how great they were and how much everyone liked them. But I'm telling you, in all my years in this business, I have never heard anyone say one negative thing about Greg Gumbel. As far as I could tell, his only character flaw was his disdain for Bruce Springsteen, but I loved him for that too. It's what made Greg, Greg. Seth's column continues. We know he's a listener to the pod. We appreciate you, buddy. This is a wonderful, wonderful piece. A few personal notes here. as you listened and saw in that video, Gumbel calling Hank Gathers' free throw left-handed for his late teammate. A big Bo Kimball doing it for Gathers, I should say. A big moment, obviously, in tournament history there. Gumbel being the voice to welcome the NFL back to CBS in late 1998, which was a massive moment for the company. It's forgotten by some, perhaps, that he had a tremendous call of Stockton in 97 when he hit that deep three to send the Jazz. I think the exact quote was, "John Stockton sends the Utah Jazz to the NBA Finals." And that would be the year that they would go on and play Jordan and the Bulls, obviously, there. Gumbel also had, whenever there would be a fumble in a game, he would rarely describe it as that. He would always just yell out or blurt out, "Lost the football." And this became such a thing that I'm the oldest of four brothers. And we grew up, obviously, playing wrestling, doing all that kind of stuff. But we would play 2-on-2 football, inside, outside, whatever. And the words in the Gumbel tone, "Lost the football," all the time. It has been one of the long-running references inside of my family forever. And Greg was just a phenomenally talented broadcaster because he could do play-by-play, transition to studio, didn't matter. Winter Olympics, NASCAR, NBA Finals, called the College World Series in baseball. Obviously, his work with Selection Sunday, and I want to get to that in just a second. But one thing that I had forgotten, GP, and the reason why I had forgotten was I don't think I ever realized it, because back when this moment happened, I was in college and I was working. I did banquet work. I worked weddings and all that kind of stuff. So when this game happened on this particular night, I did not watch it live. I was at work working some sort of January wedding. He called the tuck rule game when Adam Vinatieri hit the game winner for New England over the Raiders, and essentially that game altered the course of two franchises, the career potentially of Bill Belichick and Tom Brady. Like, if they don't win that game, who knows what? Maybe they win every other Super Bowl except that one, but obviously a seminal moment in the history of the NFL. It was Greg Gumbel who had that call. And not only did he have that call, Josh, let's cue this up as well. He does the classic. First of all, if you're watching on YouTube, notice how you can't even see this football as it disappears into the snow. And then he does the classic. He just lays out and lets the crowd take over. This is a quick clip, but Josh, go ahead, cue this up so we can take a trip back in time to 2002.
Get this kick up.
This will be a 45-yard attempt. That's Vinatieri's luck from this distance of late. This is the Patriots season on the line. The kick is away. It is good.
The classic announcer layout. You can't see a damn thing in that snow. That is really one of the all-time NFL games, and Greg was on the call. Last for me on Gumbel, as I'm sure many people listening and watching can identify with. He was the conductor of Selection Sunday. His voice at 6:00 Eastern on a mid-March Sunday every year was the thing that induced all of this excitement, anxiety, appreciation, happiness, goosebumps. He was note perfect every time. I could talk for 30 minutes about Greg Gumbel and how he actually broadcasted Selection Sunday every year, how he knew what to say in what intonation, how to build the suspense but not take it too long, how to allow Clark and Seth, and in later years, obviously, you had Barkley and Kenny Smith and the rotating cast of characters that would come in and talk on Selection Sunday. He was perfect. He was and is the voice of Selection Sunday. So many people that are kind enough to engage with our show and listen to this show, you grew up on college basketball because of what Greg Gumbel embodied when it came to college basketball. He was the one that's, as you saw in the video produced by our CBS Sports team, he was the one that handed over for one shining moment to conclude CBS and Turner's coverage every single year. And it is so sad to lose him at 78, to know that we will not get another Selection Sunday, another college basketball piece of coverage with him ever again. But he was the guy. And so much of my joy in covering this sport centers around what it is in March every single year. And there is nothing in sports, while the games are all incredible and the Final Four and the first Thursday of March, those are on a tier to themselves. The selection show and the hours-long buildup on that day to getting to dinner time on that Sunday night, there is nothing like that hour where we are waiting to see who gets in, who doesn't, who's the one seeds, who are you going to play, and Gumbel's ability to say, and in the 8-9 game, or these games will be played, in Iowa City, or these games will be played in Jacksonville, or wherever it was. The way that he was able to do that came so naturally to him, but there was no one like him when it came to that stuff. And as Seth pointed out in his column, if you're especially young, you don't have any memory of this. But before the CBS Turner Sports merger, 12 or so years ago now, CBS had all the games, which meant that for about a decade before that, you could watch these games and seek them out and watch them online individually. But if you were just watching on television, you got whatever was in your region. And I know there are some sickos out there that still wish we could go back to that. I'll take having the availability to watch any game whenever I want. Thank you very much. But there was something to the idea of you get the game you get, and then if CBS is coming in and giving you a different game, a live look in, or they'd go the original quad box, or the main game on your screen in the top right corner was another one, and whose voice would be telling you what was happening? It was Greg's. He was air traffic control for the NCAA tournament, and damn if he won't be missed. One of a kind broadcaster, a distinct legacy. So very, very missed. I will be sure, absolutely, when it gets time to get to March, more appreciation and honor and respect and references to Greg Gumbel are coming on this podcast.
Yeah, I would encourage anybody to go read Seth's piece. I thought it was really good. I told Seth that over the weekend. Like I mentioned, it feels sort of silly when you say like, we lost a colleague, because like Greg Gumbel's up here somewhere, and I just don't consider myself that. In fact, somebody like a major media outlet reached out to me Friday and was like, "Hey, could you come on Zoom and talk about Greg Gumbel?" And I just said, I don't feel like that should be me. Like, you need to talk to Jim Nance. This is our show, so of course we can talk about it here. But I didn't feel like I belonged in that setting. But I did work with him some and got to be around him, some. And I remember the first time, it was shortly after I was like, when I first started doing television, and I was in New York, and it's one of those deals where studio last night, catching a car back to the airport today, flying home. And you just sort of, you stand in the lobby and you're waiting for the car to show up or whatever. And there's Greg. We were at the same hotel, and he was doing the same thing I was doing. And I'm not the type who will go introduce myself to people that I'm not. If I see you over there, I just let you be. Usually I have some sort of, I'm never, it's some sort of disorder, but I never think somebody really is interested in me coming over and saying hello. So I just don't. And then what you find out, you end up being rude because you don't go say hello. So like, it's a long battle with myself. But I was like, this Greg Gumbel, and technically we work for the same place. I'm going to go say hello. And I went over and, brief conversation, but he was just awesome. And whether he knew me or not, he acted like he did. And I thought that was sweet. And then there's this time where, I don't know, fast forward, and we were doing the way I remember, I can't remember the show for the life of me, but the way I think I remember.
That's a shocker.
It was, we were not in studio. We were not in the broadcast center. We were somewhere else in Manhattan, like a remote shot, and comfy chairs. And again, I don't remember exactly, but what it feels like is it was something we were taping that they would run in March, in the hour before games or something. It was like top 10 NCAA tournament moments of all time, or top 10 performances of all time, or players of all, something like that. And you get a host and some analysts, and you sit around in chairs and you talk about it. That's the way I remember that. Greg was the host, and for whatever reason, I was one of the analysts. And that was I mentioned this on HQ yesterday. All the time you'll see NBA players ask other NBA players, younger NBA players. It's a perfect podcast question when you got one of those guys on. So when was the welcome to the NBA moment? Like, when was the moment where you were like, oh, wow, this is crazy. I can't believe I'm sitting here. And like, we all have those moments, not just basketball players. If you have any sort of career of note, you're going to have moments like that. And for me, one of those moments was genuinely like that day Like, I'm a public school kid from Mississippi at the time with terrible hair, just awful.
Oh, no doubt about it.
And I had this moment where I'm like, I'm like in New York City, and Greg Gumbel's about to ask me questions on television. This is crazy. Like, what? And like, and he was just, I just remember him being awesome and treating me like I belonged, even if you don't know if you do, and even all these years later, don't know if you did. Last thing I'd want to say about this, and then we can take it where we want to take it, but it was mentioned in the piece that we played that in 2001, Greg did become the first African-American or black man to call play-by-play of a major sports championship in the United States. And that's when he called the Super Bowl between the Ravens and Giants in Tampa. What I gather, and I don't know this from firsthand knowledge, but what I'm told from Seth and other people is that Greg was never the person to celebrate this. He didn't emphasize it. He wasn't comfortable emphasizing it. Other people celebrate it, and it deserved to be celebrated, but it mattered less to Greg, is my understanding. But that's a big deal. Mm-hmm. And I thought ESPN's John Schriffen had a nice story that touched on this yesterday during the Memphis Ole Miss game. John used to work with us at CBS, and he noted that, and there's a nice little story I'll tag at the end. But he said, like, John said, Greg Gumbel it was hard for me to envision becoming what I've become because there weren't people that looked like me doing it. And for me, this is John talking, Greg Gumbel was that guy. Like, I was able to look at Greg Gumbel and go, okay, look at that. That's, for people who look like you and I, Norlander, it ain't hard to find people who look like us who are doing the things we aspire to do. Been that way for decades. But for different communities, it can be much more challenging. And I respect Greg for downplaying if he felt that way about it. But I don't think you can overstate the importance of that. We see it in other aspects. Barack Obama becoming president of the United States gives people something to, that person looks like me. Maybe I could someday be that too. Chadwick Boseman becoming a superhero in a major motion picture. Like, these things do matter. It makes it much more realistic to dream of something when you've actually seen somebody who looks like you do the thing you're dreaming of doing. And John Schriffen made a point to say that's who Greg Gumbel was for me. And then he also said, and I thought this was awesome, when he got his first assignment, we all remember the first time we got asked to do anything. And John got, you get the email or the phone call, and it's like, hey, you're on the NCAA tournament. You're working the NCAA tournament. Wow. And phone rings one day. It's an unknown number. He doesn't have the number plugged in. Phone ring. Hello? Guess who it was? Greg Gumbel. Calling John Schriffen just to say congratulations. Proud of you. And, I don't think that was an accident or coincidental. I think what John saw in Greg probably also on some level understood that people do see that in me. And this phone call could really mean something. This phone call could really matter. And you hear John tell that story yesterday, and it clearly did. And I wasn't watching Memphis Ole Miss to hear about Greg Gumbel, but I was really glad they allowed John to take time to tell that story.
That's good stuff right there. Greg Gumbel, the one and only, as Jim Nantz put it so accurately in just 5 words. Greg Gumbel was broadcasting royalty.